Steve Saretsky here. As always, this is Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you get any sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask you hit thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. I'm going to keep this video short this week. Obviously, if you can't tell, I'm losing my voice. Just getting over a cold or sickness here, so bear with me. But if you watched last week's video, I had mentioned all the housing policies for the federal election. I also predicted, not that it was any sort of bold or easy or crazy prediction, but the Liberal government's obviously getting in a minority government, sort of as was to be expected. So now we wait and see if their housing policies are actually going to be implemented. They had proposed, obviously, a national speculation/empty homes tax similar to here in BC. 1% on the annual value of a home if you're a non-resident or non-citizen not using the home for at least 6 months of the year. And then as well as increasing the first-time home buyer incentive program upwards of $780,000 if you live in Vancouver, Victoria, or Toronto. Again, we'll have to wait and see if that gets implemented. I think if it does, I think that has the potential to reignite or re-stimulate the low end of the market. Again, we'll have to wait and see if that program actually gets enough uptake to make it worthwhile. Again, if you're sharing some of the equity or the upside with the government, aka CMHC, I think that's probably discouraging for some. But I can say is, at least here in Vancouver, and I'm hearing this similarly in Toronto, is that the low end affordable to market is still going, and it's still ripping in sub-segments. So to give you an example, is what I'm finding from a feet on the ground perspective is the high end of the Vancouver housing market continues to compress. The values are still coming down ever so slowly. And the low end of the market is actually stabilized and is strengthening. And we're actually seeing some multiple offer activity. And so just to give you some context, if you look at Greater Vancouver condos, there's only 4 months of inventory for sale. So you're not going to see price declines when you have 4 months of inventory for sale. So you need that months of inventory to increase. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that months of inventory is not going to increase. I think it is likely that it increases. But at 4 months of inventory, it's simply, you're not going to see price decline. So I'll give you an example just for myself and for my clients. This past week, I got an accepted firm deal done on a house on the west side of Vancouver. Tax value $3.5 million, got it below 2.8, so huge discount there. And then I was also simultaneously that same week involved in a multiple offer, a 1-bedroom condo in Vancouver, 40 years old, 40 years old, wood frame building, no rentals allowed, so you're not competing with investors and speculators. Now, priced at $499, I figured the market value was probably realistically, $520. Now, that was my opinion of the valuation. So you could say, okay, well, it was priced maybe a little bit on the lower side, but again, 40-year-old building, needed some work done to it in the next couple of years. And again, no rentals allowed, so that's going to minimize the number of people. This place got 15 offers. So my clients came in subject free over the asking price, and we actually got blown out. I believe it sold in the $550 range. And again, 15 offers. So that kind of goes to show you that these aren't investors or speculators. What we're seeing is basically end users in the market, people that are, first-time buyers or basically here earning local incomes, and they're saying, well, what can I afford? And so that low end of the market is still moving quite well as long as it's priced, where affordable incomes can sort of, make it happen. So, and it's kind of this weird market where I think we're kind of in this limbo. Everyone's trying to figure out what direction we're going in. And obviously the high end, again, is coming down. The low end is still robust. And we're in this weird environment where all these central banks are rapidly cutting interest rates. And we have the Bank of Canada, the Fed is supposed to cut rates again next week. And we have the Bank of Canada market odds say no rate cut this year. There's a 10% odds of a one Bank of Canada rate cut before the end of the year. Again, so if that transpires, my prediction will certainly be wrong. I think the Bank of Canada is actually making a mistake. I think they should be cutting rates. I think they're going to have to accelerate their rate cutting in 2020 to basically catch up with the rest of the world. Because I don't think a strengthening loonie is going to be good for our economy, particularly if housing starts to slow down. Now again, housing hasn't slowed down. It's still the driver of the Canadian economy. And we talk about, the slowdown even in Vancouver. But what we can see is construction spending in Vancouver, despite the slowdown in the spec housing market, despite the slowdown in renovation spend, despite the slowdown from developers now pulling back on new land acquisitions, construction spending totals in Vancouver is still not dipped into negative territory, as you'll see in this chart here. So to sort of summarize my thoughts on the market in the context, I think we're sort of nothing's really changed. The Liberal government gets back in. Bank of Canada is still on hold for whatever reason. I think there's obviously some current concerns about reigniting the housing market. Residential mortgage credit growth in Canada is growing faster than it did prior to the B20 mortgage stress test. So clearly the banks and consumers have digested the mortgage stress test, and borrowing has sort of resumed course. Housing market seems to be in this, sweet spot where all the large economists are coming out and calling for rising prices into 2020, and everything in Canada looks magnificent. But meanwhile, globally, everything is slowing down and the central banks are cutting rates. So I'm not in the camp that Canada is this sort of miraculous country that is exempt from a global slowdown. But I think that's what really ultimately hinges on the future direction of the housing market. Again, as I've talked about before, as long as the labor market remains strong and your interest rates remain low, there's a floor there for housing, and that's a boost and stimulus for housing. But again, if any of those indicators should shift, then I think that we're in significant problems. And I think we have to ultimately look outside of Canada to get a grasp on where the economy might be heading. So, hope that video helped. Otherwise, see you next week.